It's around this time each year we all seem to go just a little bit crazy. It's not because we feel like Christmas songs have been playing on loop endlessly for months, when in reality it's barely been 4 weeks. I mean, there is really only so much of Mariah Carey I can take. Now, with the end of the year fast approaching, focus turns to planning for the new year. But before that can happen, we need to go through the promotion cycle. It's kind of a dichotomy of emotions, really, so some will be happy, others will be disappointed. Thrown into this process cacophony is the need to obtain feedback. Oh no, you're probably thinking. That's fine, it used to be my first thought too. You see, I'm conflicted over feedback because yes, it is hard to do well and easy to do badly. Giving feedback requires clarity of thought, pondering and clear articulation. This helps transmit the message in a manner which can be received easily. Yet all too often, feedback is relegated to the bottom of the to-do list, ending up next to completing mandatory compliance training in terms of excitement levels. It becomes a chore to both the giver and the receiver. This assumes you can actually get someone to give you feedback in the first place. I may remember a few years ago, a colleague told me how she was struggling to get honest feedback from her peers. The problem? No one seemed willing to be critical or give her pointers on things she could improve on. This wasn't for the want of trying though. After each management meeting, she would approach the individuals in question and ask directly, "What feedback do you have for me?" Cue tumbleweed every single time. Now everyone seems to lose their voice at the critical time because even those who had an opinion on pretty much everything went silent. So after weeks of feeling shunned, she went rogue and tried something different. Instead of asking, "What feedback does anyone have for me?" she asked, "What advice does anyone have for me?" Oh boy, it was as if the floodgates just proverbially opened. She couldn't get everyone to speak in turn. It just turns out the word advice unlocked all the honest feedback that she needed. But what makes this little change so powerful? Well, quite frankly, the word feedback carries a lot of baggage. It kind of has negative connotations. To some, it is associated with critique or something negative. It can also seem scary and formal. But advice is softer, perhaps even more welcoming. It feels like lending somebody a hand, and when someone gives you advice, they're just really looking out for you. But why? Because it is an invitation. You're indicating to the other person that you need their help. You're really asking for their input and expertise. You may even flatter that person by asking them for their advice. Now this is all good and well, but in the corporate world, advice won't get you promoted at your year-end appraisal. So what happens if you get the tumbleweeds when asking for feedback? Well, have no fear, because by the end of this video, you will have 4 great frameworks that you can use to give feedback. Giving feedback is powerful when done well. The way feedback is framed and phrased is extremely important though, and this is where the models really come into their own. So rather than making it up as you go along, leaning on a model can help structure your feedback so it is delivered in a more clearly and effective way. This is all about ensuring your message gets across in a way that the recipient understands, and in turn you can set out what is expected of them. So starting off, here is a great model for giving positive feedback. Number 1, the SBI feedback model. I'm going to put it out there and say this is probably the most popular feedback model, with one exception which I'll tell you about later, because the SBI, Situation, Behaviour, Impact feedback model, is a way of providing feedback that aims to help the other person receiving better understand what impact their actions had. So if you want to use this model, here's how it would work. Situation. Here's where you describe the specific situation in which the feedback point you're raising occurred. Simply put, this is where the shit went down. Behaviour. Okay, so here is where you want to explain what you saw in terms of specific behaviours. This is the behaviour that underpins the feedback you're trying to give. Impact. Now describe the impact this behaviour had, whether it be on you, a team, a client, etc. The beautiful thing about this model is that it clearly outlines both the context and the content of your feedback. The reason why I suggest using it for positive feedback is that this model does not include a recommendation for the future action, so as such it kind of lends itself more to positive rather than negative feedback. Now here's a model for giving constructive feedback. Number 2, the idea feedback model. The idea feedback model actively tries to bring out change and in turn incite action for future steps, standing for identify, describe, encourage, action. The model helps with the constructive feedback as it makes direct reference to what you want the action to be going forwards. So here's how it works. Identify. This is where you decide what it is that you are commenting on. Describe. Now go through and describe the situational behaviour in detail. This is to give colour and explain what happened. I mean, ultimately you are explaining why you are commenting on this at the end of the day. Encourage. At this point, this is where you want to show the recipient that you are here to help and not just tell them off. But this can be a fine line to tread carefully because it is really easy to piss people off here. Remember, it's about encouraging them to change their past behaviour. Action. This is where you take charge. So by closing the feedback with a clear action, think of it as moving into the next steps or taking it forward. Giving constructive feedback, which is a polite way of saying negative feedback by the way, is hard at the best of times. So if you struggle with this, then the idea feedback model might work wonders for you. Okay, so what about a model for taking future action? Well, that's where number 3 comes in. The DESC model. The reason why this is so good is that it goes further than the previous 2 models because it considers future implications. Describe. D is for describe. Starting off as usual, this is where you describe the situation. So far so normal. E is for express. So now you express what impact the described situation had on you. This is where you put across how you felt, what you did, or the wider implications. S is for specify. Here's where it gets good, because the specify sections is designed for you to explain in detail how the recipient should change their behaviour. This needs to be a clear description of specific actions, so don't float around the topic, be clear and concise, not waffling. C is for consequences, because at this point you want to show the recipient how these suggested actions will affect you. This is big ticket stuff here, so it's about highlighting every action has an equal and opposite reaction. This is why the model is so good, is that it is the final step that shows the recipient just what impact they may have on what you can do differently. By giving such a clear, practical and easily understandable explanation, you will more likely impart the need for change. Also, quite frankly, it makes it more difficult for the recipient to refute your feedback as you clearly explain its benefits. That's a good thing. Okay, so what about the feedback from multiple sources? Well, that's where number 4 comes in. The 360 feedback model. Okay, so this is a favourite of the corporate world because it goes just beyond giving someone one-off pieces of feedback. This is often used to get feedback from many people, for example, when working on a project or when you've worked for a number of people throughout the year. The whole idea is that you collect feedback from a variety of sources, both upwards and downwards, so in essence, your boss or your boss's peers and those working for you. And sideways, come to think of it. So these are your direct peers. The model then collects all of this information to provide then somebody with the highly detailed evaluation. Having used this for most of my career and everywhere from accountancy firms through to big media conglomerates, it is one I have been exposed to most significantly. Here's how it works. Number 1, collect feedback on someone's performance from as many sources as possible. So this is sources across the organisation. It could be everybody from colleagues, line managers, those in the C-suite, subordinates, external clients, or perhaps even customers. Number 2, good practice is also to include self-feedback as part of the process as well, because this shows a good level of EQ and awareness. Number 3, once feedback is collated, a meeting is held with the recipient's direct manager to go through the feedback provided. Number 4, at this point, the recipient's feedback performance is assessed based on all of the feedback collated. It is a full circumference across the firm, hence it being called 360. It is highly likely a plan for future development is outlined based on the feedback provided as well. Now, one of the best parts about this model is it doesn't just rely on one person. Instead, it provides a much more holistic view of someone's performance, and it is also then based on what many people have observed. So it's likely to include a number of different roles and capabilities across the organisation. Now, this is one that I wasn't going to include, but really it's kind of number 5 or a bonus because this is the traditional one, the feedback sandwich. So this is probably the first one that comes to mind when you think about feedback models. I mean, it's the oldest, most used feedback model out there. This is a textbook example of feedback methods, but doesn't mean it's a good one. You may even know it by a different name, the sandwich. That said, it can be a useful tool in certain settings. Even though you may know this, let me just explain. You start with a piece of positive feedback to get the conversation going. You then deliver a piece of negative feedback. Thirdly, you finish with another piece of positive feedback to leave the conversation on a positive note. It's a proper good, bad, good combo. A metaphorical feedback 1-2, the I don't know, the feedback equivalent of a jab, right hook, jab in the boxing terms. The idea is that you soften the blow of the negative feedback by packaging it in between two pieces of positive feedback. Of course, the downside is that this often leads to confusion or misunderstanding. This is because the recipient isn't sure how best to interpret the feedback, or if they did something, whether it's good or not. The real issue is that once you deliver the bad feedback, the good bit at the end will probably be lost. The recipient is likely to hold on to whatever the negative feedback was and therefore ignore whatever comes next. The quick-fire positive feedback after which may also make you sound disingenuous too, which is never a good thing. That's why this method is best suited for flagging small mistakes and commenting on actions that don't have a huge impact, rather than highly contentious, important constructive feedback delivery. Yeah, don't do that. And that's it. These are 4+1 bonus feedback frameworks which will help you pass on feedback in a more controlled and comfortable manner. I hope you find it useful. But with that, I would love to hear how you've delivered feedback and what has worked for you. Please do let me know in the comments below. But do you know what the 7 leadership lessons we learned from Queen Elizabeth II are? No? Well, check out this video right here. But with that, have a great day, and I'll see you all in the next video. Cheers.